And I don't think either of those two could have been able to cope. They'd been anywhere else. And that was the only good thing that happened, was that they were there.
There are stories the Royal Press Office hopes you forget by morning. Stories that never make the official statements, never appear in the carefully worded palace releases, never get addressed in the choreographed walkabouts and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Stories that reveal what the House of Windsor actually looks like when the cameras are pointed somewhere else and the gloves come off. This is one of them. And what makes it extraordinary is not just the scandal itself. It is not just the property, or the alleged unauthorized use, or the legal machinery that has reportedly been set into motion. What makes this story cut deeper than the average royal dispute is who is at the center of it. Not a junior royal caught in a tabloid embarrassment. Not a distant cousin behaving badly somewhere far from the cameras. The name at the heart of this confrontation sits at the very top of the modern monarchy's most sensitive fault line. And the woman who allegedly decided enough was enough, the woman who pushed this matter toward legal territory rather than the usual corridor whisper, is perhaps the one royal alive today who has never once in her 70-plus years cared what anyone thought about her willingness to fight. Princess Anne does not bluff. That is the first thing you need to understand before any of this makes sense. And the second thing you need to understand is that what she is allegedly fighting for is not simply a property dispute. It is something that cannot be replaced, something that cannot be negotiated away in a meeting room by palace lawyers, something that carries a weight no square footage calculation can measure. But to fully grasp why this moment has the potential to reshape the internal landscape of the British monarchy, you have to go back further than the headlines. You have to understand the geography of Balmoral itself, what it actually represents to this family, and why an accusation involving its unauthorized use is not simply a legal matter. It is something closer to a declaration of war. Balmoral Castle sits on approximately 50,000 acres of the Scottish Highlands, surrounded by the kind of landscape that makes people understand instinctively why this family has retreated there for generations. It is not crown property. It does not belong to the state, to Parliament, or to the institution of the monarchy in any abstract or administrative sense. It was purchased privately by Prince Albert in 1852 as a gift for Queen Victoria, and it has passed through the family ever since as private inheritance, separate from the formal machinery of the Crown estate, belonging to whoever sits at the head of the family rather than to the office of the sovereign itself. Queen Elizabeth spent more genuine, unguarded, unperformed time at Balmoral than anywhere else on earth. For 70 years of public life, through the coronation and the jubilees and the crises and the losses and the relentless, grinding performance of royal duty, Balmoral was where she exhaled. It was where she rode horses before the photographers arrived. Where she walked the hills without a schedule. Where she cooked simple meals and wore old coats and was, by every account of those who knew her in private, most completely and uncomplicatedly herself. She died there. In September 2022, Queen Elizabeth II took her last breath at Balmoral Castle, in the place she loved most, in the landscape that had held her most honest hours for the better part of a century. The estate did not pass to the crown upon her death. It passed privately, as it always had, to her heir. To King Charles. And that specific piece of Scottish land, soaked in grief and memory and decades of the most private hours of the late Queen's life, is precisely what sits at the center of this dispute. Tom Parker Bowles is 49 years old. He is Camilla's son from her first marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles, a marriage that ended in 1995 after years of the particular complications that attend a union conducted in the long shadow of a royal affair. He has built a genuinely successful career as a food writer and author. Multiple cookbooks published to strong reviews. A reputation as a knowledgeable and engaging presence in London's culinary and media world. Regular appearances on television and at literary festivals. By the standards of royal adjacent figures navigating an unusual position in public life, he has generally conducted himself with more grace than the situation might have required. He is not, by any legal or formal definition, a member of the royal family. His mother's marriage to King Charles in 2005 made Camilla the Princess of Wales and eventually, upon the King's accession, the Queen Consort. It gave Tom Parker Bowles a stepfather who happens to be the King of England. What it did not give him was royal status. What it did not provide was any formal access rights to royal properties. What it did not confer upon him, under any reading of the relevant inheritance arrangements and property law, was the authority to use Balmoral Castle as though it were a resource available to the extended family network that formed around his mother's second marriage. And yet, according to the reports that have emerged from sources close to the situation, that appears to be precisely what happened. The specific details of what allegedly occurred at Balmoral point to something that went well beyond a casual misunderstanding about scheduling or availability. This was not someone wandering into the wrong wing of a large house during a family gathering. The alleged use of the estate was substantial enough in its scope, extended enough in its duration, and documented enough in its footprint that the matter did not quietly resolve itself with a private conversation the way these things typically do inside the carefully managed ecosystem of the royal family. It escalated. And when it escalated, it reached the attention of the one person in this family least likely to absorb it quietly. To understand Princess Anne's response to any of this, you have to understand who she actually is beneath the public image of the dutiful, slightly formidable Princess Royal who turns up to more engagements annually than any other royal and accepts her CBEs and her honorary doctorates with the expression of someone who has somewhere more important to be. And Elizabeth Alice Louise was born in 1950, the second child and only daughter of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. From the beginning, she occupied a specific and complicated position in the family constellation. Not the heir. Not the spare in the way her brothers were the spare. The daughter, which in the context of mid-20th century royal life meant something particular, meant a certain kind of expectation about visibility and duty and the manner in which her life would be shaped around the requirements of the institution rather than the other way around. She responded to those expectations by becoming, by almost universal assessment, the hardest working and least self-indulgent member of her generation of the royal family. The statistics are not subtle. For decades running, she has completed more public engagements than any other royal, including the king himself. She has been patron of hundreds of organizations. She competed in the 1976 Montreal Olympics as an equestrian, the first British royal to do so, and did it on merit rather than patronage. She has traveled to some of the most difficult and inaccessible corners of the world on behalf of Save the Children and other causes, not for the photographs, not for the profile, but because she believed the work required doing. She survived an attempted kidnapping in 1974, during which a gunman stopped her car on the Mall and tried to force her into another vehicle. Her response to the situation was so composed, so practically focused, that the story has passed into royal legend. She is not a person who frightens easily. She is not a person who backs down from confrontation when she believes the confrontation is warranted. And her relationship with Balmoral is inseparable, in the most fundamental way, from her relationship with her mother. Of all Queen Elizabeth's 4 children, and was understood by those who observed the family across decades to be the one most temperamentally aligned with her. Not the most publicly beloved, not the one who inspired the most affection in the tabloid coverage, but the one who shared her mother's actual character most completely. Both women possessed a directness that was almost startling by the standards of their world. Both were most fully alive outdoors, on horseback, on working land with something practical to accomplish. Both had a profound and genuine impatience with pretension, with performance, with the kind of elaborate emotional display they privately regarded as noise rather than feeling. When Queen Elizabeth died at Balmoral, and was there. She was the only one of the Queen's children present at the end, the only one who made it to Scotland in time. She sat with her mother through the final hours. She was in the room. And in the days of public grief that followed, it was Anne who released the personal statement about her mother that those who read it described as the most honest and unperformed tribute issued by any member of the family, a statement that spoke of duty and service and love without recourse to sentiment or performance, in the unmistakable voice of a daughter who had known her mother not just as a monarch but as a person. Balmoral, to Princess Anne, is not real estate with a complicated title structure. It is the last place she sat beside her mother while her mother was still alive. Now hold that understanding and consider the psychological reality of what happens when someone with that relationship to a property learns that it has allegedly been used without authorization, treated as an available amenity, by someone whose entire connection to the estate flows from the marriage of his mother to Anne's brother, a marriage that was itself, in the long and painful history of this family, the culmination of everything that destroyed Charles's first marriage and placed Anne in the position of watching her sister-in-law suffer publicly for years. The tension between Anne and Camilla is not a secret within royal circles, even if it has been largely managed and contained in public presentation. It stretches back through decades, through the years of the affair, through Diana's pain, through the slow collapse of a marriage that had been, from some perspectives within the family, problematic from before it began. And was loyal to the institution above everything else. She always has been. But institutional loyalty did not require private warmth toward the woman whose relationship with Charles had cost the institution so much, and had cost people and cared about so much more. Camilla spent years earning a form of acceptance that was never freely given. The late Queen's eventual public endorsement was genuine, but it was also arrived at through a long process of rehabilitation that required patience and strategy and the kind of careful positioning that does not come naturally to people who are simply liked. The Platinum Jubilee message that named Camilla as future Queen Consort was a formal signal, not a spontaneous expression of family feeling. And observed all of it. She attended the events. She appeared in the photographs. She performed the unity that the institution required. But there is a significant distance between performing unity and feeling it. And there is an even greater distance between tolerating the presence of someone in your family's life and tolerating the alleged use of your dead mother's most sacred private space by that person's son. What the Balmoral situation appears to have triggered is the breach between what Princess Anne was prepared to manage publicly and what she was willing to absorb privately. Because there is a version of this story where a more diplomatically minded royal, one more invested in the institutional management of appearances, encounters this transgression and routes it through the usual internal channels. A call to the king's private secretary. A quiet conversation. A firm but contained resolution that never reaches the point where the word legal enters the vocabulary. And did not choose that version. The reported movement of this matter toward formal legal channels tells you something specific about how severely she assessed what allegedly happened, and something equally specific about her determination that it not dissolve into the institutional silence that has protected so many royal inconveniences across the years. She has watched that silence operate her entire life. She has contributed to it when she believed the institution required it. She contributed to it after her own first marriage ended. She contributed to it through circumstances that would have generated years of headlines if she had been less disciplined. This time, apparently, the calculation was different. The difficulty that nobody inside the palace wants to examine openly is what this confrontation means for the relationship between Anne and her brother. Charles has paid an extraordinary price over the course of his adult life to have Camilla accepted, not just tolerated but formally legitimized, not just in the press but within the family itself and within the formal structures of the monarchy. The price was measured in decades and in damage, in the suffering of his first marriage and the long years of public hostility and the complicated grief of his children. He married her. He made her queen. He published his late mother's blessing of that outcome as an official palace communication. He has done everything within his considerable power to close the question of Camilla's place in this family permanently and irrevocably. And now his sister, the Princess Royal, the hardest-working and most duty-bound member of the family, the woman who was holding his mother's hand when she died at the estate in question, is allegedly taking legal action against Camilla's son over the use of that estate. There is no clean path through this. If the matter proceeds formally into legal territory, it becomes public in ways that no communication strategy can entirely contain, ways that reopen every conversation the palace believed it had permanently closed about the fractures and divisions within the House of Windsor. It embarrasses Camilla at a moment when her position as queen requires a stability of public perception that this kind of story directly undermines. It creates a narrative about the new reign that the king's advisors would give a great deal to prevent. If the matter is quietly resolved through internal pressure and private negotiation, and is effectively being asked to stand down from a position she has chosen to take publicly enough that standing down becomes its own statement. She is being asked to absorb, again, a transgression against something she holds in a category beyond ordinary property, and to do so for the sake of an institutional management of appearances that has, from her perspective, consistently required her to subordinate her own feelings to the comfort of others. People who know Anne well, who have observed her across the decades and understand the particular nature of her loyalty to both family and institution, say consistently that she does not make this kind of move without having fully accepted the consequences. She is not impulsive. She is not dramatic. She does not generate legal proceedings out of emotion or without careful consideration of exactly what she is starting and exactly where it might end. If she has moved this matter into formal territory, she has done so with the full understanding that it will not remain private, and with the judgment that the alternative, absorbing this specific violation of this specific place for the sake of this specific family peace, was something she was not prepared to do. There is also a larger question sitting beneath all of this, one that the specific details of the Balmoral dispute illuminate in ways that go beyond the individuals involved. The question of what the new reign actually is, what kind of monarchy Charles III is building, and whether the unity it presents publicly corresponds to anything real in the private relationships that hold it together. The late Queen provided the monarchy with something that cannot be manufactured or managed into existence. She provided it with a center, a gravitational point around which even the most complicated and conflicted family relationships could be organized. Her presence, her authority, her 60 years of accumulated moral standing within the family, held things in a shape that would not have held otherwise. She died at Balmoral, and with her went the particular force that had kept certain distances maintained, certain transgressions unthinkable, certain boundaries respected not because of legal frameworks but because of who she was and what she represented to everyone in that family. Balmoral without Queen Elizabeth is a different place. And apparently, in the absence of the woman who made it sacred, someone decided it was simply a large and convenient castle available for use. Princess Anne has spent more than 7 decades in service to an institution that has asked more of her than it has publicly acknowledged, that has received her discipline and her loyalty and her extraordinary work ethic and given her, in return, less visibility and less credit than members of the family who generated far more drama and demanded far more management. She has never complained about that arrangement. She has never sought sympathy for it. She has simply continued to show up, year after year, engagement after engagement, in the unglamorous and essential work of what the monarchy is actually supposed to represent. Showing up, it turns out, includes this. It includes drawing a line around the things that cannot be allowed to dissolve into convenience or carelessness or the assumption that the new family configurations created by her brother's second marriage extend rights and privileges that were never conferred and were never available to extend. She is not bluffing. People who have known her for decades will tell you that without hesitation and without qualification. Princess Anne does not bluff, does not perform confrontation she does not intend to see through, does not place herself in positions that require backing away from. And in a family that has been built for centuries on the careful management of silence, on the institutional machinery of denial and the performance of unity over the reality of fracture, the sound of Princess Anne refusing to stay quiet may be, in the end, the most consequential thing she has ever done for the institution she has given her life to protecting. Whether the monarchy is capable of receiving that gift is another question entirely.